but to not for the purposes of telling the joke, but to unpack the joke and explain sort of it as like a microcosm of everything
Okay.
about. Just be a separate section if you wanted it. Should I divide between the sections and then we'll probably
Well, I
make
mean, if you, I think the way we did it last time worked really well, and I was thinking I was quite looking forward to editing it because it was quite straightforward. That you kind of had your main sections,
yeah.
and it was fairly distinct. And I really liked as well the way that you referred to things around you. I thought
Hmm.
that worked really well. The only thing I'd say before we start would be if you could just move your camera around just a little, so because the thing with Windows, there we go.
That better?
Yeah, because Windows and natural light are the enemies of webcams. They just overload them, so everyone automatically turns into a silhouette, no matter how well intentioned they are.
Is it better like that?
Yeah, it's great like that.
Okay. 1 second. Um, okay, so I might break between them just to take a drink or.
Of course, you're allowed to do that. Don't worry. So here we go, take two. If you'd just like to kick off by just briefly introducing yourself, and then kind of take it from there, as you
Sure.
will.
Okay. All right. Ready when you are. Okay. Hi, good morning or good afternoon, depending on the case. My name is Joe Wolfson. I'm from London originally. I always thought from my mid-teens that I was going to go into politics, and it took me 2 degrees in politics to become disillusioned with that idea. And before I realised that what makes me get out of bed in the morning is the fact that I am fascinated and intrigued by my religion, which is Judaism, and rather than it being a hobby on the side, I decided I wanted to make that into my profession and my vocation. So currently I'm training as a rabbi in Israel with the intention of returning to the UK within a few years' time. Within Judaism, there are many different streams and denominations and varieties. Some are ethnically different, some are doctrinally different. I define myself as Orthodox and more specifically modern Orthodox, but that I'm going to come to at the end once I've explained a few basic concepts which are, as it were, the necessary building blocks. Okay. Um, Judaism 101. Here goes. Judaism is naturally grouped together with Islam and Christianity for a very simple and a very good reason, that they are considered to be the three monotheistic religions, which is that we all trace our origins back to Abraham, or in Hebrew, Abraham Avinu, and Judaism is the oldest and considers itself the original of the Abrahamic religions. And this idea of a belief in a single God, in contrast to the polytheistic beliefs in multiple gods societies of the ancient Near East where Abraham resided, this belief in a single God is melded together, I believe, in all three religions, and certainly in Judaism, with an idea that this gives us as man, as believers in this single God, various ethical imperatives, be they to those immediately around us, be they to solving much wider problems. The Bible speaks of God creating man in his own image, and this is not a pictorial description, but an actual ethical statement. Man is created in God's image, therefore he needs to respect all other members of the human race as a result of that. The sorry, just skipping a moment. How then does Judaism differ from Islam and Christianity? The most obvious difference as well. Most obvious difference is just how small we are, just how tiny. I mean, it's pretty shocking that you guys at the Tony Blair Faith Foundation actually get a video on Judaism, considering which we are such a minute percentage of the world. I mean, altogether now, before the Holocaust, the Jewish population was about 18 million worldwide, went down to 12 million, and I think now it's back up to around 15 or 16 million. The current chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, Jonathan Sachs, is very keen on saying that the world Jewish population is less than the statistical error in the Chinese census. So Why is it that we are such a small religion? Well, multiple historical reasons, but one very important one, which I think is deeply connected to the heart of Jewish belief, is that we are not universalist. We are not proselytizing. We do not believe that in order for our religious vision to be fulfilled, that everybody needs to be like us. Judaism does accept converts, but if you are planning on converting to Judaism, here is a warning right at the start. It is difficult. People will try and put you off. The role of Jewish legal authorities is to make sure that converts really, really want it. Conversion is for some, but certainly not for everyone. Now, this idea of a religion which is not for the whole world, the idea of your religious vision not only being complete if everybody is like you, is an interesting one. And I think it pushes in a number of directions. One word which is often bandied around when it comes to talk of the Jewish people is that of chosenness, this belief that Israel has a special relationship with their God. Now, on the one hand, I suppose that this can be seen as perhaps potentially arrogant, or what is it about you that decides this? Well, it certainly shouldn't be understood as any sort of preferential idea or superiority idea. I think the mainstream understanding of the concept is that God calls upon us to enter into a specifically intense relationship with him. How that relationship is manifested we'll come on to in a few minutes. But other than sort of this feeling that we have a specific and a special relationship with God, I think there is also a certain humility involved in the idea. Let me explain what I mean by that. The idea being that every nation, every people, every group, every individual in the world has their own way of finding their own truth, of meeting God or gods or whoever. And in a sense, Judaism mandates that. Judaism does not demand that the whole world accept their own vision. Here is a verse that I've just pulled out. It's from the prophet Micah, or Micah, said in English. Let every people walk, everyone in the name of his God, and we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever. And I think this is this balance between particularism and universalism is a very interesting one. On the one hand, our idea is to benefit the world, to help create a world and a society which has the image of God deeply implanted within it, but at the same time, not to insist that all are like, or everybody be saying that there is dignity in difference, there is beauty in diversity, and each group, each setting has their own way of approaching God. End of part one. Okay. Part two. In the West, especially Christian countries, there is an idea that the most important thing involved in being religious is belief and certain doctrines, or another word is faith, right? The Tony Blair faith foundation, right? What separates Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, etc., what they believe. Now, this is specifically Christian inheritance in my mind. This isn't to say that Jews don't place significant importance upon certain beliefs and ideas. They absolutely do. But that stress upon beliefs, such as belief in a single benevolent God, etc., that plays second role to action. And the word that is used, the word that all Jews will be familiar with, is a word called mitzvot, or in the singular mitzvah. Colloquially, the idea of a mitzvah is often understood as a good deed. You should go and visit your grandmother, it's a mitzvah. You should give charity, it's a mitzvah. But more true to the actual meaning is the idea that the word mitzvah literally means a commandment. This is not something I might do, something I might not do. As a religious Jew, My world is made up of mitzvot, of commandments, for the most part with their origin in the Torah, which is the Hebrew word for the Bible, and many others then developed and elaborated by the rabbis through very significant works of Jewish thought and Jewish law, such as called the Talmud and the Mishnah, and various legal codes. And let me just explain for a moment what this means. Imagine a pair of night vision goggles. Night vision goggles, which, as I've never worn a pair. I just had various games on my PlayStation growing up, which pretended I was wearing them. So at least as I understand them, night vision goggles allow the person wearing them to isolate various instances of heat. Right? Heat often. Humans will glow in contrast to that which is around them. Now, what I want you to imagine is a pair of mitzvah night vision goggles. What that means is that as I look at the world around me, it presents opportunities and obligations which are incumbent upon me, which are the trigger for various religious actions, which somebody who's not wearing those goggles wouldn't see at all. I'll give you a very, very simple example. Behind me, on my mantelpiece, you might be able to see a pair of candlesticks and a smaller box. You might have heard of the idea of the Sabbath. The Sabbath, in Hebrew Shabbat, the seventh day of the week, Saturday. The Sabbath is a day on which Jews refrain from all creative activity, a day of rest, a day of being with one another. This doesn't mean a day of chilling at the beach, a day of going to watch Spurs. Rather, what it means is a day dedicated to learning, to relaxation, in a specific environment that is created. Now, one of the aspects of Shabbat is ushered in by the lighting of 2 candles. Okay? And every Jewish home, every practicing Jewish home, will have a pair of candlesticks in a prominent place which are lit at sundown on a Friday evening to signify the beginning of Shabbat. Here we've even got a few smaller ones. These are for guests of ours. If they're staying, they will be able to light. The box that is next to the candlesticks is a tzedakah box. Tzedakah means charity in Hebrew. The idea of keeping the charity box next to the candlesticks is that, well, it'd be likely to give charity every day, but if you only manage to do it once a week, as you look at your Shabbat candles, you'll remember to give charity then. What else can I look at? Here on the chair next to me are a number of articles which, as a religious Jew, I use every day. This in Hebrew is called a talit, or a prayer shawl, which when I pray every morning, Jews pray 3 times a day, I wrap myself in the talit like that. I would say a blessing over it. These have a horrible word in English. In Hebrew they are called tefillin. In English they are phylacteries. They are 2 boxes, one for the arm, one for the head, with various scriptures, various pieces from the Bible, from the Torah in them. One wraps them around one's hands and one's head when one prays every morning. But even much more mundane matters than a special day of the week than prayer. Here on the table I also have a fruit bowl. In the fruit bowl is a grapefruit. It probably should have been eaten last week. Every different food item has a certain, what's called in Hebrew, bracha, a blessing which needs to be said on it beforehand. If it's a fruit, it will have a certain one. If it's wine, it will have a different one, etc. And what I mean to by stressing this point, that the idea that the religious Jew's life is built around mitzvot, that your whole being, you are always responding to your environment in a religious way. I'll give you an even more, perhaps more surprising one. If I see sunset, on the one hand, one religious response to that sunset might be, wow, isn't it beautiful, look at God's splendor, etc. But it also means that the window of time in which I can say the afternoon prayer is about to elapse. And if I haven't yet prayed the afternoon prayer, it takes about 10-15 minutes, I better do so before it gets dark. Now, let's just do a little bit of sort of comparative religion for a moment, just to explain why this is so significant. one of the most important breaks between Christianity and Judaism around 2,000 years ago. Really probably doesn't centre so much about what one believes about the historical figure of Jesus, but specifically Paul's rejection of the mitzvot. What he saw the Jewish society around to him as, enslaved to the law, enslaved to the flesh, etc. He believed in, a more spiritual one, which doesn't depend upon the physical world so much. And I really think this is a fundamental divide between Judaism and Christianity. The idea of mitzvot, of saying a blessing on a piece of fruit before I eat it, on sanctifying a certain day of the week, indicates that my religiosity exists in this world. It does not seek to run away. My soul does not seek to leave my body to get up to some more supernal realm, but rather right here in this world is the opportunity for spirituality. I sanctify this world through the performance of mitzvot. So again, let's go back to this simple grapefruit. Grapefruits have no specific role in Judaism, which just happens to be the fruit we've got on our table at the moment. As it is at the moment, it's just another piece of mundane existence. But before I eat it, by saying a blessing beforehand and afterwards, I have now elevated it, as it were, into my spiritual world. And it's worth dwelling on this point for a moment. I just want to spend a few moments speaking about ideas that emerge from this. Firstly, the mitzvot, the actions make tangible our most important beliefs. So, God creates the world in 6 days and he rests on the seventh day. You've probably heard that. That's not something I believe in the abstract, as it were. By lighting the candles every week and ushering in the Sabbath, that idea is given tangible expression and also works backwards on me being impinging it on my mind by... I don't believe just in an abstract notion of doing good and social justice. I give charity every week. Another idea is the following, that Jews, despite, as I mentioned earlier, being a very small percentage of the world population, are hideously divided amongst themselves. Right? 2 Jews, 3 opinions is the old line, or a joke that's often appreciated is... a Jew is marooned on a desert island for many years and eventually is rescued. And he shows his rescuers around the habitation he's created for himself on the island and his various amenities. And they see a synagogue and they think, oh, that's nice. He made a place of worship for himself. And then a little while later they see another synagogue and they say, well, look, it's only you on the island. Why do you need 2 synagogues? And he says back to them, well, that's the synagogue I don't pray in, right? And for such a small population, there is a tremendous divergence of Jewish thought, so much so that you wouldn't really think that they would be able to be contained in a single religion. What is it that allows for such diversity of thought? I think it is the fundamental commitment to a life of mitzvot, meaning that whether you are a mystic or whether you are a super-rationalist, what binds the 2 of you together is that you will pray together in the same group 3 times a day. The Sabbath will be there for you. You will say the same blessings, etc., etc. Another element of it is also the relationship to Jews who do not see themselves as religious. Ritual life maps itself onto social life much more easily and fluidly in Judaism than it might do elsewhere. Let me give you an example. When I was doing my undergraduate degree at Cambridge, I had a very interesting discussion with the Christian dean of my college. And he said that he has a very difficult time attracting students who aren't religious to any of his events, because the sort of events he puts on, let's talk about the Bible, let's talk about whatever else, will only have an interest for those who are already interested. I, at the time, was head of the Cambridge Jewish Student Society, the JSOC, and our main event every week was a Friday night dinner. Now, what is a Friday night dinner? On the one hand, for me as a religious Jew, it is a major expression of the idea of the Sabbath, which is one of the pillars of Jewish belief. But for the 100 or so students who turned up, who certainly do not define themselves as religious, the Friday night meal was a social event, a social gathering which they had grown up with in their homes. And so the gap between ritual life and social life are very much melded one on top of the other. Okay, that was a long section. Hope I didn't lose you with it. End of that section. Quick break. All right. If mitzvot, comprising blessings, prayers, the Sabbath, etc., are one of the very important characteristics of what it means to be a religious Jew, another one, which I think is just as important, is the significance and value of study. Studying, what's called in Hebrew Talmud Torah, is not simply the preserve of the elite, of the religious scholars, of the rabbis, of the equivalent of monks, etc. The idea is that every Jew, whoever they are, has an obligation to be educated and to educate themselves. And this is not just the equivalent of a manual of learning what should be done, but has a specific emphasis upon creativity, upon new interpretations. There's a couple of very important phrases. Ein bet midrash v'lo chidush. There is no such thing as a house of study, meaning people who sit down together to learn, which doesn't come up with some novel idea. Another one. Elu ve'elu divrei elokim chayim. These ones and these ones, meaning different opinions in a certain legal argument, are the words of the living God. The idea being that revelation at Sinai, God gives the Torah to the Jewish people, was a one-off event in history, but it also continues within Jewish communities as they delve in and learn and involve themselves in the study of Torah. And this experience, this idea that somebody approaching a text can open up and give their own interpretation to it, and that has significant religious validity, a sort of ongoing revelation in a sense. This is a very liberating idea, a very empowering idea, even quite a democratic idea. And I said at the beginning, and I'll talk more about it, I define myself as an Orthodox Jew. Nevertheless, when I am involved, when I speak to non-Orthodox audiences, reform or liberal or conservative groups, one of the, I think really the most important thing that binds us is the idea that shared study, that textual study, whether it be the Bible or whether it be later works, is something that each one of us can approach as a shared platform, a shared field or conversation for all of us to involve ourselves in. And I think if an element of unity is to be maintained between various denominations within Judaism, learning is the central action that unites them. Maybe again, sorry, just to always be harking on about Christianity, let me just give another expression of that. Probably the most important Jewish philosopher of the Middle Ages is a man called Maimonides. And his parallel in Christianity is probably St. Thomas Aquinas. They live more or less at around the same time. Aquinas quotes Maimonides, who lived slightly before him. They're both probably the central figure in trying to deal with the knotty relationship between faith and reason. And although I haven't conducted a scientific survey, my guess is that very many young Christians who take their Christianity quite seriously, let's say they go to church once a week, wouldn't be able to tell you much about Aquinas. Or, they might not even have heard of him. By contrast, I believe that any Jew who is somewhat interested in their Judaism will be able to tell you quite a bit about Maimonides. The relationship between our religious practice and our texts and our study is absolutely critical. Okay. End of that section. Have I got a bit of time more?
Of course, have as much time off as you want. You're doing a very good job.
Oh, good. Have I got time? A couple more sections?
Oh, well, I mean, I would say if you could you've romped through the stuff you covered, most of the stuff you covered last time. If you could just do I found your expression of orthodoxy, particularly when you were talking about your experience in that synagogue in Poland, to be really powerful. I mean, and to be perfectly honest, if you do that, even if I edit it, it's still going to be quite a chunk.
Gotcha. Okay. So should I do that section?
Please.
Okay. I said at the start that I define myself as Orthodox, and more specifically modern Orthodox. What does that mean on the spectrum? Probably the simplest way to explain it is to give an example that divides me or separates those who define themselves as modern Orthodox from both the right, what is called perhaps in Hebrew, Charedut or ultra-Orthodoxy, and the left denominations such as liberal and reform. What separates each one of us? The fundamental difference between... sorry, let me go back for a moment. When one's talking about distinction between different denominations in Judaism, one has to have a little bit of historical sensitivity. That for much of Jewish history, until I would say at least the 18th century, there was certainly regional and ethnic and cultural variation, and significant variation. But in terms of basic belief and basic practice, there was not. The halacha, codes of Jewish law, mitzvot were viewed as binding, the rabbis were viewed as having legal authority, etc. With the Enlightenment, when for the first time the ghetto walls break down, Napoleon Bonaparte most famously originally offering the Jews of France for the first time full status as French citizens, when Jews were for the first time given the offer of participation in wider society, something that had not existed for the most part beforehand, they were faced with a quandary of now what? Do we become Frenchmen, Englishmen, or do we stay as Jews, or do we find some sort of synthesis between the two? And in many ways, that question is still echoing 200 years later. And Jews at different places on the spectrum are giving different answers to that question. What is it that separates me from my co-religionists to the right, from those who would be called ultra-Orthodox? What we have in common is a commitment to mitzvot. What is separate probably is that as a person who is modern Orthodox, I see really every period in history and every potential society as an equal opportunity for the ideal expression of my religion. I don't hark back to one specific time. I don't wish that we still lived in a secluded society. Modernity throws up questions, which are challenges in a positive way as well. It means that we will be far more willing, and indeed see it as obligatory to respond to changes in society. Just the most obvious example would be the changing status of women in Judaism in parallel to changes in wider society. Beyond that as well, I think, is an idea of areas of interest, that I see my religiosity not just as taking place within my classical texts and within my classical practice, but also expanding to other areas. To show you just some bookshelves of ours, I'll show you my wife's books here. This is Hebrew works on the Bible, many different commentators, and the shelf below it, my wife's background is in art history, is our own collections. And the idea of being a modern Orthodox Jew is that there is a bridge and a connection between these different areas. There are very many areas in which one's religiosity can find expression, something which those to the right of me may well have difficulty with. They would place more exclusive elements upon only finding religious significance within sort of classical Jewish practices and texts. What is it that divides me from my co-religionists on the left, the reform and liberal movements? Fundamentally, it is seeing my life as being lived through the performance of mitzvot and of serving God through these mitzvot, the mitzvot that I was talking to you about earlier. For the movements to the left, they are seen in some ways as cultural values. They are not seen as religiously binding. For me, as an Orthodox Jew, it's not just a good thing to give charity. I have to give charity. It's not just a nice thing to pray. I have to pray. I see it as an obligation. Let me give a story to express that. A number of years ago, I went with the institution that I was studying at the time, an Orthodox institution, to Poland. Poland, obviously, as probably the country which saw the greatest extermination of Jewish communities during the Holocaust. On our first day, we arrived in Warsaw. Warsaw, which once contained a population, a Jewish community of 500,000, now has several hundred. The old synagogue has somehow remained standing. On our first day in Poland, we went to the synagogue. We prayed there the traditional morning prayers, and afterwards we sat down and we studied. We did precisely in that synagogue what had always been done in that synagogue. Then we had to move on upstairs to allow for another group to come through. The group was an American Reform group. And for them, this place was my strong impression was one of historical interest. As it were, the experience that they were going through this was Jewish life. Jews would come and pray here. Then along came Hitler and wiped out European Jewry. And we are looking back on that, as it were, as a museum exhibit. We don't pray in this synagogue. We don't study in this synagogue. They strummed the guitar for a bit. They sang some songs. And I just had a very strong impression, a very strong feeling that I was continuing the way in which we had related to that synagogue was precisely the way in which the community of Warsaw had related to it for the 1,000 years of its existence prior to the Holocaust. An idea being that our historical ancestors and forebears, be they Maimonides in the Middle Ages, Rabbi Akiva of 2,000 years ago, or even King David, would not find, if they walked into an Orthodox community today, would not find the life so fundamentally different. They would be able to recognize in it the key aspects of their own existence. And that is what I think is my personal experience as a modern Orthodox Jew. It's somewhat to live in a sort of a dichotomy between, on the one hand, having one foot very firmly planted within the tradition and another one very firmly greeting the world. But the hope is, not to be in a triumphalist way, but the hope is that that tension also sparks a certain creativity with it. Thank you.
That was outstanding. Thank you very, very much.
That's very kind.
That was really good. Really
Thank
good.
you.
And
Would you like jokes as a separate section for those who want?
sorry?
Would you like the
Yes,
jokes
let's have the joke. Can't go wrong with a joke.
Okay. I'm going to tell you a joke now. And the point is not to tell the joke, but the point is to try and unpack the joke afterwards in order to combine a lot of the elements we've been speaking about. A little bit of halachic Jewish legal background to the joke. You'll recognize, of course, my grapefruits, which is featured prominently in this video. As I said, before I'm able to eat the grapefruit, I need to make a blessing, a bracha. Blessed are you, O God, etc., who has creates the fruit of the tree. Now, the bracha is not just a nice thing to say, let's give thanks. It has a specific legal halachic existence. That means that once I've said it, I can't then delay and go and make a cup of tea before eating my grapefruit. I need to say it immediately. I can't say them what's called levatala, for no purpose whatsoever. That's just the halachic background. Okay. Take yourself back to how you might imagine the Eastern European Pale in the late 18th century. Jewish shtetls are scattered throughout. And Cossacks are marauding through the Ukrainian countryside. And the rumor reaches this small Jewish village that their village is going to be next. All the other communities in the area have suffered terribly, and now it's their turn. And in this town, there's an elderly and pious Jew who has lived all his life trying to serve God through the study of the Torah and the performance of the mitzvot. And now he realizes that his time has come and he is going to die what is called the Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name, the history of Jewish martyrdom, of Jewish persecution, to die with God's name on his lips. And he walks out into the main street of the town. He gets down on his knees. He hears the Cossacks approaching at the other end of the town, and the cries and the screaming, etc. He gets down on his knees, he closes his eyes, and he utters the blessing that martyrs say before their death. He says, "Blessed are you, O God, who has commanded me to die in the sanctification of his name." And he's there waiting for it, and he hears the Cossacks approaching, and he sees the brutal swordsman coming on his horse, and he just rides straight past him and off out of the village. And he's sitting there going, because he can't speak, because he said the blessing. Now, let me try and unpack that joke for you for a moment. On the one hand, obviously at the heart of the joke is an idea of Jewish history, right? That Jewish history has been replete with sufferings and persecutions, be it Crusades or Spanish Inquisitions or the Holocaust, etc. Now, Sigmund Freud, had an idea that Jewish humour is a defence mechanism to that sad history, right? If you don't laugh, you'll end up crying, right? Part of the reason why we enjoy humour so much is because it's just a way of dealing with our history. That probably does have a certain element of truth to it. However, I'd like to think there's also something else going on in the equation. And that is that we are, perhaps it's to do with being a small religion and for the most part never having been in positions of real power, that we're willing to laugh at ourselves. We're willing to take ourselves not too seriously. God, maybe sometimes he laughs at man, but he also laughs with man. And to take the idea of not just dying, but also dying in sanctifying God's name, and to show sort of, as it were, the ludicrousness of the halachic system at the same time as our deep intimacy with it, is very much a way in which sort of Jews have built their culture around service of God, around humour, around their history, and around not taking themselves too seriously. Thank you very much.
Outstanding. Thank you very much.